photography, the hunt, the pursuit. Finally, a tool exists that can help me realize my creative brilliance. No more screens, the human eye, photons traveling across the galaxy to be harnessed by my will. And yet, even more important than my vision is how I look. Look at this understated camera bag and my trendy leather strap. Everybody must be looking at me and just saying, wow, that guy's got it figured out. I mean, where is everybody? There's nobody around here? Nobody? Oh, I'm gonna go find somewhere busy where people can check me out properly. Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. Chris Nichols here, and we have a very early look at a pre-production Fuji X-Pro3. Now, I am a camera reviewer and I try to be as unbiased as possible, but I'm gonna admit something to you. I honestly wasn't a big fan of the X-Pro 1 and X-Pro 2. I personally felt that the hybrid OVF, EVF system was a novelty. I'm really gonna try my best now to play with this X-Pro 3 and not let that jade me, okay? Now, I do want to say, again, this is pre-production, so the files and stuff like that, it's not going to be final firmware, but this is absolutely a niche product, and we're going to use it in its niche. We're going to get out on the street and do some shots. And I do want to point out as well that Jordan is also filming me today on an X-Pro 3 pre-production as well, so have a look for that. Take a look at the video quality. Got continuous autofocus on in 4K, so should be good. Let's go try it out. I'm gonna try not to be jaded, I promise. In order to try my best at this, I've made a pact with Jordan that for the first half of the video, I'm just gonna force myself to use the optical viewfinder, see how it goes. Then if I want, which I probably will, I'm gonna switch over to the EVF. So a couple thoughts on the OVF, and there's quite a departure here with the X-Pro 3. So first, on the X-Pro 1 and X-Pro 2, what Fuji will let you do is swap between different magnifications. Now this really suited different focal lengths. I could go to a lower magnification when I needed a wider field of view to frame wide angles properly, and then I could go to a tighter crop, which would get me a more usable magnification for using telephoto lenses. On the X-Pro 3, they've done away with that. So now what I have is a 0.5 magnification viewfinder. It's just a bit below the 0.6 magnification that we would have had on the previous cameras in that sort of telephoto mode. And overall, I don't mind it. I mean, it's a usable compromise. I do still find that if I'm using my 75mm equivalent lens today, that I'm getting a fairly small frame to look at. And if I wanted to go really wide, the widest frame I'm going to have is a 35mm equivalent, although I could just use the extreme outside of the frame lines, and that would probably give me fairly close to a 28mm kind of focal length. If I want to use something wider angle, this optical viewfinder is not going to do it. I'm going to have to go to the EVF. So I know we're trying to keep this camera under wraps because it's still before embargo, Jordan, but I feel like this gray tape is just drawing more attention than less attention. So in a complete departure from any other digital camera I've ever seen in my entire lifetime, the LCD on the X-Pro 3 is basically always folded inward to the camera. And instead you're looking at this square screen on the back. And what it basically does is shows you your Fuji simulation box art for the film mode that you would be using. And let's just say it is adorable. You also have white balance displayed there in ISO, so it gives you a little bit of a heads-up display. And when you do cycle through different features, like my Fujifilm simulation modes or white balance, it will update that, although I have to remember what button does what, because there's no indication, like a highlighter or anything like that that comes up. My other complaint about this square is that it actually is reliant on ambient light to reflect through to really show you a clear view. So out here, no problem, but if I take this into low light, it's almost impossible to use that display. Okay, but let's say you're this really grumpy person who hates Fuji simulation modes and you don't like colorful box art and you're gonna shoot raw, do everything in post, nothing in camera. Well, then you can turn this into an equally boring monochromatic display, and you can actually customize a lot of what's gonna show up in that heads-up display. So battery life, shots remaining, white balance, exposure comp, all the usuals. I do wish I could have a live histogram display here, but so far you can't. Maybe they'll change that, we'll see. And it does bring me to another thing I want to talk about. If this is the display on the back, well then what happens to my LCD screen? Now as I fold out the screen 180 degrees, there we go, that's the full extent of its articulation. I cannot vlog with this screen at all. I can waist level shoot with it, and that is a nice feature. And I'm gonna be popping this out anytime that I really want to play back images, or I'm gonna have to do that through the EVF. But it really does change things for you. You know, at least with the Leica MT series, I had no option to look at the photo. But here I can force myself to keep it away and just shoot, not worry about chimping my photos, but the temptation's always there. I can pull it out. Now, if I do want to shoot with the screen out and I have to have it in this sort of array, I will say it actually does kind of make a grip, a handy grip. Look at that. I can just hold it like this and shoot this way off the screen. Here's another issue. If I put a tripod plate on here and it's very close to the 1/4 inch thread on the bottom, this isn't gonna flip out past that point. You know, it's gonna jam up against that plate. And I know Jordan's been struggling with that on his video rig quite a bit. The positive here, I guess, is that it is a very good quality screen. It's a 1.62 million dot screen, great refresh rate, very sharp to look at, and probably the nicest screen that I've seen on a Fuji APS-C camera. But it really does change the way you use this camera. And I mean, it's so specialized. I think honestly I'm finding it somewhat more of an annoyance than anything else. The other option is I can totally rely on the EVF, do everything like menu functions through the EVF, but I really don't find that very comfortable. Now, Fuji's code word for this camera before it was actually released to the market was the Titan, and I imagine that's because it actually has a machined titanium top and bottom plate. Now, titanium is very strong and very rugged. It's also lightweight, but it's also very expensive, not only to machine, but to purchase in general as the raw material. And so I guess the idea though is it does make it more prestigious. The inner body is magnesium, again, to keep the weight down, and overall it does have a very beautiful feel and look to it. Fuji's added another feature to the cameras, albeit at an even higher price point, to make it even more durable. And I have mixed feelings on this. So first off, you can get the X-Pro3 in just a plain glossy black finish, a lot like the older cameras, and honestly that's the way I would go. You do also have a silver finish and this admittedly very beautiful gray finish, and this actually uses a diamond-like carbon coating. Okay, they've actually added a material coating to this. Now on the plus side, it makes this thing basically scratch proof. On the downside though, fingerprints and just gunge seem to stick on this thing and not come off very easily, and you really see it. I mean, it's gross. Handing someone your camera and saying, please take my photo, they're gonna think it's icky. The core of this camera, it's very capable. This is the exact same 26 megapixel sensor that the X-T3 uses the same processing engine as well. And this camera can certainly push 11 frames mechanical continuous shooting with a decent buffer, so it can handle lots of advanced photography. Now, Fuji's added a couple features that I want to talk about here, and the first thing is in black and white modes you can use a color toned effect. I can basically change to a purple tone or sepia tone, green tone, whatever I want. It looks very much like a white balance shift display. I can just choose a color field and then the camera will tint the photo in that color. You can use your touchscreen to go up, down, left, and right and move the cursor around, but it is very slow. And so far on this pre-production camera, it seems strange that I can't just touch on the actual color squares themselves to choose something, but maybe that'll be fixed. We also have a return of the grain effect menu, and this works in both color modes and black and white modes, and just again lets me change from rough grain or smooth looking grain, but now it can also change the size to a large or small grain. When it comes to the grip, it's quite comfortable. My thumb's not covering any buttons, so I'm not hitting anything accidentally. The joystick's in a great position. It's easy to push. The autofocus auto exposure button's a little bit far away for me to press, and I would normally use that for autofocus on. So instead, I've simply customized that to be the back dial press-in function, and that's working pretty well too. I also like where the exposure compensation dial is placed. I can very easily and instinctually change it, but I'm not accidentally moving it. I will say though, however, and this might be again, this is pre-production, but I'm finding the camera's overexposing my shots just a little bit, so I've been constantly pushing that down 1/3 of a stop or 2/3 of a stop. So I want to give you all a heads up. There's a brand new Fujifilm simulation mode here. They call it Classic Neg, but I'm told by Fuji it's supposed to mimic Superior 100, so expect a lot of the color shots today to be shot in that mode so that you can see the new results on this brand new film simulation mode. We have a fair amount of customizability on the X-Pro3. I do have a button here right on my OVF, EVF toggle. I can change that. I've got a custom button right up here next to the on-off switch. Right above the Q menu, I've got another custom button. I can also, as I've talked about, customize the AE/AFL button. So a fair amount of customizability there. Now I do also have the classic Fuji touch interface where I can swipe up, swipe down, swipe left, swipe right. And I could set those to things that are useful when I've got the LCD screen out. But of course, when I'm primarily using this with the LCD screen in, those 4 functions are of course inaccessible. Here's another customization that I really like, and it's brand new for the X-Pro3. I can customize my quick menu now to be either solid or transparent, so I can see what's going on behind the frame, and if I see a shot that I want, I can just push the shutter and grab it. I also like that I can simplify it. I can go from the full quick menu display, which I've always found really crowded, too many features, down to a minimum of just 4 tiles if I want, and I can customize what those 4 tiles are. So this is a really nice way to simplify things, to have the features that only I need to use, and I do find that to be a really welcome feature here. Okay, so I've given the optical viewfinder a fair shake, and again, I do appreciate the benefits. I like that I can see what's outside my frame lines, especially for street photography, so I can plan my shots and see what's about to enter the frame. I like the fact that when I push the shutter and I hear the shutter click, I've seen the actual moment that I've captured. That is really nice too. I get it, okay? However, I do feel, especially with the interface on this camera being so EVF dependent because my LCD screen is always covered in the camera, I'm going to the EVF. I'm going to do it. I'm doing it. I'm switching to the EVF. I'm just going to shoot that now. And Fuji's actually tuned the shutter mechanism, and I didn't know if I'd like it at first. When I heard it, I thought this sounds like marketing, but I actually now really like it. So they've tuned it so that it's got quite a substantial half press stage. I'm going to push it down a fair ways, but I like that because it's not ambiguous. I know that I've got a half press there. And then if I push even a little bit more, it's actually a very soft and silent press. All right, so using the EVF here for a little bit, here are my findings. First off, it's really nice to use. 3.69 million dots of resolution. It's now an OLED, so the contrast is way better than we had on the X-Pro1 and X-Pro2. And with Power Boost mode turned on, I'm getting 100 frame per second refresh rate, so it's nice and smooth. Now this better EVF does create a challenge for me because, as I said at the start of the video, I'm trying to force myself to use the OVF more. And at the same time, with this EVF being even better, with the fact that I'm very dependent on it now because the LCD is not something I can easily access, and yet I still want to change menu functions and go from, you know, stills to video and stuff like that. And also the fact that we now have things like the monochromatic color effect and more Fuji simulation modes, which I really want to preview real time on an EVF, it's pushing me towards just using the electrical viewfinder. So the autofocus here on the X-Pro3 is substantially improved, but there is an issue going on, and I want to kind of check this out. So first off, the X-Pro3's autofocus works at -6 EV, very impressive. I'm happy with the tracking performance, both through the optical viewfinder and the electric viewfinder. I do also want to say that the face detect has been improved here. I'm still annoyed with Fuji where you have to actually dedicate a button to choose between different faces. I wish I could just use the joystick. However, I am having an issue on the face detect front. Through the EVF, it's working brilliantly. It's picking up faces from further away than it normally did before. It's tracking them very nicely. Through the optical viewfinder though, I cannot seem to get face detection to work. If I'm missing something, that's great. If it doesn't work through the OVF, but only gives me face detect through the EVF, that would be another major hit against why would I even touch the optical. It just keeps happening. Jordan and I ask for something to happen, like a custom focus limiter. We have a video about it, and the manufacturers listen to us. They do it. And this is proof right here, proof of concept. The Fuji X-Pro3 now has a custom focus limiter. It's set up exactly the way that Jordan and I asked for it. Simply set your focus, push the button, set your focus somewhere else, push the button, and that is your range. You're welcome.
Hey everyone, it's Jordan to talk video on the Fuji X-Pro3, which I was lucky enough to shoot the entire episode with. And I was kind of dreading that experience because Fuji has emphasized that this is a photographer's camera so much I was wondering what they were going to pull back. but I was surprised how much they actually kept in. There's only 2 ports on the camera, but with adapters you can use those for a mic jack and a USB-C adapter to a headphone jack, and the rest of the video specs are very similar to the Fuji X-T30, which recorded quite nice looking video. Now it is 8-bit, you're capped at 30 frames per second as your maximum when you're shooting 4K, but you still get very nice looking 1080 120 frames per second, which brought a lot of majesty to our intro. I'm impressed that they kept the Eterna profile that I shot this entire episode on. It's my favorite video profile from any manufacturer, and if you need a little more dynamic range, there is still F-Log in there as well. I like Fuji's implementation of their phase detect autofocus. With phase detect, occasionally it'll wander, but for the most part, it does an excellent job. And that's the real takeaway. If you buy the X-Pro3 because you're just going to go take pictures and suddenly one day you find you have to shoot video, this is a pretty capable little device for that. But if you're going in knowing that video is a priority for you, just buy an X-T3.
Well, I've had a fun afternoon using this camera, I really have. And first off, I guess I want to talk about the 2 ways that you can look at this camera. In a very optimistic way, you can look at this as a very sexy, very specialized camera. A beautiful OVF, just ignore that it has an EVF, ignore that it has an LCD screen. Use it in a very pure way, much like you'd shoot a Leica MD camera. And in that regard, it actually performs very, very well. Or you can look at it in a pessimistic way. You can look at this as a modern mirrorless camera that does have an EVF. In that case, the OVF is superfluous. There's not much need to use it. And the LCD screen implementation becomes incredibly obnoxious. You see, it's when you compare the X-Pro3 to the X-T3 that this camera becomes a tough sell. Because what does this really have that the X-T3 doesn't have? They have the same sensor, the same processing engine. They're both equally sexy, stylish cameras. Okay, this one is sexier and more stylish, I will give you that one. But this is certainly a nice looking camera as well. The -6 EV autofocus capability, the new classic neg film simulation modes, the monochromatic color effects, that is stuff that could very easily be added to this and most likely will be added to the X-T3 with firmware upgrades. So you're really left with, I guess, the optical viewfinder capability. You're paying a premium for that experience, the OVF experience. For me personally, I just don't think it's worth it. I'd use this as an EVF camera and then really, I'd use this instead. Well, I hope that this little preview of the X-Pro3 gives you a better idea if this more expensive camera is right for you. That's really the question that you're gonna have to ask yourself. Leave us your comments below, let us know what you think. Don't forget, subscribe to the channel. Instagram and Twitter will have other information on this camera as well as photos that we upload. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you with another review very soon.